5 years after the release of the first game, and 3 years after Miles Morales, Insomniac Games has returned with Spider-Man 2. This is the sequel to both of the previous games, and it incorporates both Peter and Miles as main characters. This game also serves as the continuation for a lot of the things that the previous games set up, especially surrounding Harry Osborn and the symbiote. Being a PS5 exclusive, this game has a lot of technical and graphical advancements that are amazing, and the team at Insomniac managed to improve on so much from the previous games, but there were also some things that I felt were weird, and some things that I think are downgrades from the other games. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the gameplay and the story, and I'll be giving my personal opinions on it, as well as comparing it to the first game to see just how much it improves on, or where the first game outshines it. This video will have spoilers for the game, but I will start out spoiler free, and don't worry, there will be another warning when I get into spoiler territory. Alright, to start off, I want to talk about the gameplay. It's the easiest to cover without spoilers. There are a ton of new additions, and the combat system is nearly a complete overhaul. Let's start off with the traversal. Web swinging in this game is absolutely amazing. The capabilities of the PS5 allow for stunning environments to swing through, which overall enhances the experience. Just look at these environments. The game is visually stunning. Back to web swinging. This game is a huge improvement over the first. Just take a look at this. In Spider-Man 1, Peter's swinging was mostly static. Aside from a few flips and tricks that he could do after letting go, Peter always had the same position during a swing. This was improved on for Miles Morales, where Miles' position would change depending on if you're doing a trick, and there was just a lot more variety in the animation. In the new game, Miles gets a lot of the same animations from his game, but the variety extends to Peter as well, making his swinging feel a lot more lively and fun. The new addition to the traversal this time is web wings. With these, you can glide around the city using the momentum you gain from swinging around. These wings were a great addition to the game. Swinging around the city has never been more fun, and every time I had to swing somewhere, I found myself using the wings more often than not. Before the game came out, Insomniac was saying that swinging in this game would be faster than ever, and they were right. So many times during my playthrough, I found myself flying right past missions because I was coming in too hot. Luckily though, as you learn the mechanics, you stop flying past things and learn to land exactly where you need to be. Unfortunately though, no matter how good I got at landing, I was never able to stop jumping or flying into walls. I didn't clip it when it happened, but during my first playthrough, I stopped a crime and had to bring someone to the hospital. My friend was talking about the person I was carrying. She said that being carried by Spider-Man while swinging would be terrifying, and she would be worried about banging her head on a wall. I replied, "I've never hit a wall when carrying someone." Immediately after I said this, I went face first into a wall with the person I was carrying. Anyways, that's just a skill issue on my end. Web swinging and the web wings are so much fun in this game, and it's a definitive improvement over the other games. As one last thing, around the city there are a bunch of areas where you can perform a super slingshot, which sends you flying and gives you a lot of momentum. I found myself using these every time I found one, because the speed is just so much fun. Even when they were facing the opposite direction where I needed to go, I would just slingshot myself and then turn around. The combat system is another thing that got some major additions. It ditches things from the other games, and anything that carries over is reprogrammed, along with some new additions. Suit mods were ditched in this game, being replaced with different abilities that evolve depending on where you are in the game. Peter starts off with iron spider arms, but then he gets the symbiote and you unlock the symbiote powers. These abilities are shown on the bottom left of the screen, accessed by holding the L1 button and then pushing any of the 4 main buttons on the controller. For Miles, these abilities are his Venom strikes, which slowly evolve during the game. For both characters, you are able to switch between which set of abilities you want. For Peter, at any time, you can choose to use the arms or the symbiote, and for Miles, you can choose to have the same Venom abilities from his game, or you can choose to use the new ones introduced in this one. You have to choose one or the other though, you can't have them all active at the same time. On the other side of the screen, you have your web gadgets. This time, Peter and Miles both share the same ones, having their basic webs as well as 4 gadgets. You have the Ricochet Web, the Concussive Blast making a return from the first game, the Web Grabber, which is very similar to the Gravity Well in Miles' game, and lastly there's the Upshot, which is basically the Suspension Matrix from the first game. Those gadgets are shared between Peter and Miles, which makes sense as we have the Iron Arms, Venom, and Symbiote abilities to take up the other slots rather than having 8 web gadgets again. Anyways, the actual combat was also updated, adding in the ability to parry attacks. They also revamped boss fights, adding health bars and multiple stages per fight. A lot of the bosses end up becoming a lot more skill-based than the first. There are annoying parts though, like the parry attacks. During fights, boss fights especially, there are times where you have to get into a pattern of dodging things. However, you can't dodge heavy attacks, which are the main thing that you'll be parrying. This leads to a problem where you end up dodging a bunch of attacks, and then get a heavy attack that you can't dodge. There were so many times where I ended up getting hit with a heavy attack because I was in the middle of dodging something that came before it. This is also a skill issue on my end, but the first 2 games didn't have the option to parry, which means that the combat was heavily reliant on dodging attacks. I've been playing those games for 5 years, so when this game came out with attacks that you can't dodge, I always instinctively tried to dodge, which resulted in me getting hit a lot. This is why I struggled in boss fights, especially the Venom boss. Upon replay, I tried the game on ultimate difficulty, and when I got to the lizard boss, I realized that even though I was getting good at parrying on time, most of the time, Peter just wouldn't do it. That was kind of annoying. In the first 2 games, in order to 100% all districts, you had to stop 5 crimes from each of the groups of villains. Normal Thugs, Mr. Negative's Demons, the Raft Escapees, and Sable's Mercenaries. This continued over to Miles Morales with the Underground and Roxxon. However, in Spider-Man 2, the crimes are no longer mandatory to 100% the game, which is a change that I love because waiting for 5 crimes per district per group was awful. However, for whatever reason, despite the fact that they aren't mandatory, crimes end up appearing so much more frequently in this game. So, completing 100% of the game ends up being a lot faster because you don't have to wait around for specific crimes to show up, and you don't have to grind out specific crimes at specific points of the game. The last change I want to bring up is the focus bar. In the first 2 games, any amount of focus can be used to heal yourself in combat. This game makes it so that you need a full focus bar to heal. You need to heal 5 health, you need a full focus bar. You're at 1 health and are probably gonna die before you can get a full focus bar? Tough shit, you need a full focus bar. I do think that this is a good challenge though, as just like with dodging, you kind of become reliant on healing with focus during the first 2 games. I do find this to be a bit more of a fair challenge than the heavy attacks that kind of blindside you during boss fights. Anyways, that's about all the gameplay I can touch on without getting into spoilers, so I'm now going to be getting into them. If you want to avoid that, then you have been warned. So, this game brings back the MJ stealth missions, but with one very important change. You don't lose if you get seen. This single change makes them so much more fun to play. I actually really like that you can run up to people and stun them, and even after getting seen, you can dodge their attacks. Eventually, during one of the missions, she gets an upgrade to her stun gun that lets her web up enemies. I ended up having a blast with that, running around, webbing enemies to walls, and then stunning anyone around them. They bring back Harry's lab experiments again, but this time there's much more variety. Instead of the run around and grab samples of something sequences from the first game, this time around you will either have puzzles where you combine the genes of multiple plants, isolate compounds by destroying abnormalities in their structure, or fly a drone around and shoot shit. There are also missions that are specific to Peter or Miles. Miles gets crowned as the hero of Brooklyn Vision's Academy, and due to that, there are a series of side quests where the students of the school ask Miles for help. Meanwhile, Peter has a series of side quests where he works with Yuri, now Wraith, to take down a cult known as the Flame. This set of side quests actually sets up Carnage, as the leader of the cult is Cletus Cassidy, and the final mission ends with him getting a symbiote. The gameplay does have a few issues though. There are a few glitches and quirks that I ran into. During one of the EMF missions, you have to ride a bike through a bunch of checkpoints. One aspect of that mission is that there are ramps around the path that you can jump off of. During the end of the mission, the battery on the bike malfunctions and you're put on a time limit to finish the course. When this happened, I tried to use one of the ramps and ended up phasing through it and getting stuck inside the ramp. I tried going backwards, forwards, off to the side, but nothing worked and I had to wait out the timer to restart the mission. Later, when using the web wings to glide around the city, I managed to accidentally glide under a bridge and then get myself stuck. I was stuck gliding and couldn't go back down. I was able to fix this by disabling the wings, which just made me fall out of the bridge. When you have to interact with things, there's usually a small circle that tells you can interact with it. When you get close to it, it gets highlighted and tells you to push triangle. However, on at least 2 separate occasions, the game bugged out and I couldn't interact with anything to progress the missions, so I had to reload a checkpoint and try again. There was also one bug I encountered where I reloaded a save file and the audio was non-existent. The only audio that you could hear were the webs and symbiote attacks that I used. Take a look. I've also seen a couple glitches online as well. There's a glitch where, when you select a suit for Peter or Miles, the model will load in as a white cube. This isn't just a visual glitch on the suit menu. Selecting that suit will actually let you play as a white cube. There have also been a few glitches that I noticed in Jacksepticeye's playthrough. In the cutscene where Peter gets the symbiote, instead of the mask forming around him, Peter's hair just kinda fades away and then the suit appears over his face. As one last thing, I'm not entirely sure if this next one is a glitch or just something that has a chance to happen naturally. During one of the cutscenes where the symbiote takes control of Peter, MJ uses her stun gun to try to wake him up, and it causes the symbiote to attack her. Right before it attacks, you get the first introduction to Venom's voice, as Peter tells MJ to run. MJ. In Jacksepticeye's playthrough, this dialogue just didn't happen. Anyways, back to the actual gameplay. Another problem I have is that the tutorial boxes never go away. This is especially an issue near the beginning of the game, where it locks you in place during segments where you could easily have been swinging towards your destination. It just really annoyed me that they included dialogue within gameplay, but then locked your character in place. I don't care about the dialogue, I just wanted to get back to swinging around the city. The tips also just don't stop. All the way in the final battle, the game was still telling me when and how to heal, as if I didn't already know. Also, every time you miss a parry attack, it tells you, parry or jump to deal with heavy attacks. Yes, I know, you made it perfectly clear when you stopped the entire game just to force me to parry an attack at the beginning of the story. Anyways, the last thing I wanted to touch on is something that I only really figured out while writing the script, and I'll also touch on this a bit more in the story segment because I do think that it's a problem there too. But I feel like there is a really big disparity between the gameplay of Peter and Miles. And that's not because their gameplay styles are different, but because their styles are almost exactly the same. There's just clearly more work put into one over the other. As I mentioned earlier, Miles starts off with his normal Venom powers. These powers then evolve throughout the game because his energy gets entangled with Mr. Negative's energy. My point is, though, Miles' main abilities before unlocking the new ones are carried over directly from his game. Until you unlock the new Venom strikes, there is nothing unique about his gameplay. Even then, I personally don't find the new ones to be all that fun. Like, one of the last abilities Miles unlocks is the ability to pull enemies towards him using his Venom. But that's exactly what the Web Grabber gadget does. One of the abilities has Miles jump from wherever he is to another enemy, But the Venom Punch, which is the first Venom power you get in this game, acts nearly the same. Miles just ends up punching them away instead of landing on them. I understand that they tried to give Miles these unique powers because they wanted him to be equal with the two sets of abilities that Peter gets, but they don't feel unique, they just feel rehashed. Even Miles' ultimate ability is just the Mega Venom Blast from the first game. There's also the fact that Miles' invisibility is only used in the story, like, twice, and both of these are in the same mission. There's a tutorial that tells you how to use it, but it's not even mandatory during that mission. There are no mandatory stealth missions. You can't upgrade the invisibility at all, and the first time he uses it, he gets detected almost immediately. It gives you a set amount of time that you can use it, and that decreases if you attack or use webs while invisible. This is one of Miles' two defining abilities that would give him a unique gameplay style, but they didn't even try to incorporate it into the story or gameplay that much. Compare this to Peter, who got two unique sets of abilities, the Iron Spider Arms and the Symbiote, as well as an ultimate ability that allows you to do a ton more damage while you don't take damage, and almost every attack ends up performing a finisher on the enemies. Playing as Peter makes you feel powerful, and every ability just adds to the fun of it. The Iron Arms aren't as fun as the Symbiote powers, but even so, I had a lot more fun playing as Peter, and that's just because Miles wasn't given as much focus. Alright, there's a decent amount to talk about with the story. With Kraven, the Symbiote, Harry, Venom, Anti-Venom, Scream, the Symbiote invasion, there's so much. I'm going to start it off with a summary of the story, and then I'll break it down more. This game takes place nearly 2 years after the first, following both Peter and Miles as they continue trying to balance their lives as themselves and their lives as Spider-Man. Miles is applying to college and is struggling to write his personal statement, while Peter is struggling to get and keep a job, resulting in him being behind in his mortgage payments for May's house. The opening cutscene shows Harry before he goes into the stasis tank for his treatment. It shows how his father used the symbiote and gave it to Harry. We then cut to the present day, where Peter lands a spot to teach physics at Brooklyn Vision's Academy, ironically ending up as Miles' teacher. However, on the first day of school, Sandman attacks the city. Peter and Miles ditch class to go take care of it, which is the first mission of the game. After stopping him, Peter tries to tell Marco that they want to help him, and if he needs it, he just needs to ask. In response, Marco tells the spiders that they are going to need help. Anyways, we get a cutscene that shows Kraven. There's a hunter who's looking for him, but Kraven is one step ahead and ends up killing him. After that, one of his goons gives Kraven the idea to go to New York, as there are plenty of superpowered individuals who he could hunt. Then, after that, Peter and Miles help out in the aftermath of Sandman's attack, and then go back to BVA, where Miles ends up missing his appointment to get help with his essay, and Pete ends up getting fired for failing to look after his students. After talking to MJ, they're both shocked to see Harry, who pulls up to May's house after being taken out of his stasis tank. MJ has to get back to work, so Peter and Harry are left to catch up. They go on a bike ride to Midtown High and have a trip down memory lane, before Harry starts to pitch a science foundation that's meant to heal the world. It's called the Emily May Foundation, named after Harry's mother, Emily, and Aunt May. He gives Peter a badge, and Peter agrees to check out the lab with Harry the next day. Anyways, after this, we get to see Kraven arrive in New York. Peter calls Miles to supervise a prison transfer because MJ told him that Scorpion was being transferred. While there, they found out that Martin Lee is also being transferred, which sets Miles off. The transfer is interrupted by Kraven and his goons as they try to break Scorpion and Lee out. Peter and Miles try to stop them, but Scorpion takes advantage of the situation and manipulates Miles into setting him free. After that, Miles ends up coming up on Lee's cage, which is flooding due to the ship sinking. Lee asks Miles to save him, but Miles is seeing red. After Lee gets submerged in water, Miles decides that he isn't going to let Lee die like this, but as he's about to use his venom, it changes from orange to blue, and Miles is unable to control it. Luckily for Lee, the hunters lift his cage out of the water, draining it and saving him. Miles follows and tries to stop the hunters from getting to Lee, but before he can stop them, Lee breaks out. They have a stare down, but then Kraven shows up and tries to take Lee. Miles shoots a web, and it becomes a tug-of-war between Miles and Kraven, but Miles eventually lets Lee go because Peter needed his help to save civilians. After this, Miles is really stressed about the fact that Lee has escaped prison, and that becomes a big plot point in his story. Peter then meets up with Harry at the lab, and he gets a tour where Harry shows him all the scientists that are working on things to heal the world. One apiologist made a robot bee that is used to shoot and kill bee wolves that are harming the ecosystem. There's also a scientist who is genetically remapping plants to make healthy new species that can thrive. The lab is very advanced and has a lot of impressive things around, and Harry uses all of this to entice Peter into joining him as co-founders of the Emily May Foundation. Peter is hesitant to join, but he ends up teaming up with Harry in a really heartwarming moment. Anyways, after this, Miles gives Peter some intel on Kraven, so he goes to check it out and discovers that the hunters have cloaking tech and are using that to hide all around New York. After checking that out, Peter finds one of their bases and does some sleuthing, where he finds out that Kraven has killed Scorpion and has a list of supervillains that he's going after. He gives that information to MJ, who passes it on to Miles, and Miles goes to warn Black Cat about this. In the process, he helps her to get to Paris to protect her girlfriend, and then he makes his way to Coney Island to meet up with Genki. Peter also goes to Coney Island to meet up with Harry and MJ. Miles ends up getting stuck in an attraction made by Mysterio, so he leaves early. Pete, Harry, and MJ go around trying different rides, but on the last one, the hunters attack because Tombstone is working there as a technician. Peter steps in to try and save him, but before he can, the hunters damage the rides, which forces Peter to leave Tombstone and save the civilians on the rides. Unfortunately, Peter is pinned under one of the rides and is unable to get everyone off the roller coaster, but Harry shows up at the last second and uses the symbiote to save Peter, who is then able to save the civilians. Peter and Harry stay up all night at EMF testing out the symbiote powers. In the morning, Norman walks in on Peter and Harry sleeping in their office, which was trashed by Harry testing his powers. Peter leaves, but not before finding out that Dr. Connors hasn't come in for work that morning. Afterwards, he gets a tip from Black Cat that Tombstone is being held at a steel foundry, so Peter heads over to try to rescue him. While there, Harry shows up as Agent Venom, and they team up to save him, spawning one of my favorite moments in the game.
Oh, there's our guy. What's the plan?
I think we should get him.
What?
Anyways, Peter and Harry rescue Tombstone and escape the foundry as it collapses. After that, they fist bump on a building and the symbiote temporarily latches onto Peter's hand, forming a spider logo on Harry's suit. While this is happening, Miles attempts to stop a robbery at an art museum. Anyways, back with Peter and Harry, they get a call from MJ as she went to check Dr. Connors' house and found out that he was taken by the hunters. She infiltrates one of their vehicles and is taken directly to the base where he's being kept. After sneaking around, MJ manages to get into Connors' cell, but Kraven arrives and injects something into Connors, which begins turning him back into the lizard. Peter and Harry arrive and try to buy time while Connors tries to make a cure, but Kraven takes the chemicals needed to make the cure, leaving Connors to fade as the lizard comes out once again. Peter tries to step in, but Kraven stabs him and tosses him away. This results in probably my favorite part of the entire game, where MJ tries to carry a dying Peter to safety, while in the background, Harry is just wailing on Kraven, going apeshit because he hurt Peter.
MJ, I don't think... Am I breathing?
I'll kill you!
Harry!
Do it then!
Insomniac does a great job at giving you so much power, but then making you feel so powerless during specific missions. Anyways, this sequence ends with Peter dying, and as MJ and Harry are mourning him, the symbiote ditches Harry and revives Peter. Harry, MJ, and Peter go back to EMF, and Kraven, following the beatdown he got from Harry, shifts his focus onto the spiders. Peter tries to give Harry the symbiote back since it was the only thing saving him from his disease, but it refuses to leave, so they make a plan to find Connors, cure him of his lizard, and get his help to give the symbiote back to Harry. So Peter goes back out to find Craven, and he gets intel about a party that's going on. He masquerades as a waiter and makes his way to Craven's office to get info. There, he finds out that Craven is dying from cancer, and that he's at a church that's not too far from the party. When he gets there, the symbiote is bothered by the sound of the rain hitting the church bell. He takes the serum from Craven, but not before Craven notices that the sound waves fuck with the suit. So Craven hits the bell, completely immobilizing Peter. He then just destroys the bell and runs away. Unfortunately, the serum has a tracker on it, so when Peter and Harry start turning it into the lizard cure, the hunters show up and destroy the EMF building. Harry is disheartened because their dream just went up in flames, but both Peter and Norman are focused on other things, which upsets Harry more. Peter takes the lizard cure and goes to try to find Connors at his house, but while he's there, the hunters show up for the same reason. This leads to a fight where Peter starts to show signs of aggression from the symbiote. He realizes that Connors is at an old fish market across the river, but he won't be able to make it on time, so he calls Miles and tells him to head over. Miles goes there and fights some hunters while looking for Connors. Peter then makes it to the fish market, and Connors breaks out of the building, leading to a three-way chase between the Spider-Men, the hunters, and the lizard. In the end, Connors makes his way into the sewers, and Peter follows him alone, resulting in an underground boss fight that breaks out into the city, and then concludes back in the sewers. While exploring the sewers, Peter finds a rock that Dr. Connors was studying. Whatever it is, the symbiote is attracted to it, and Connors used the particle accelerator at EMF to break it. Before Peter can figure it out, he has to fight the lizard, but after curing him, Connors explains that the rock is the meteorite that the symbiote originated from, and Peter realizes that he's wearing an alien. Unfortunately, the bond between Peter and the symbiote is too strong for him to be weirded out by this, and the symbiote starts taking more control. Peter starts referring to him and the symbiote as we, and he refuses to give it up when Connors tells him to. He then goes home because he's exhausted, but hunters follow him, resulting in the symbiote taking over his unconscious body and fighting the hunters. MJ calls Miles for backup, but the ensuing fight results in Miles demolishing a tunnel so that MJ can try to snap Peter out of his aggressive trance. While she's doing this, Miles gets tricked by a hunter and is tranquilized, resulting in him getting kidnapped. Meanwhile, MJ finds out that Peter is still asleep, and she uses her stun gun to try to wake him up. This results in the symbiote attacking her, and she runs away, barely avoiding it. The next day, Peter wakes up on a random bench with a bunch of missed calls from Harry and Miles' mother. He also gets a notification of MJ's newest article, which talks about how Peter has caused more harm than good during his time with the symbiote. He goes to visit Harry, but gets immediately defensive when Harry asks for the suit back. MJ then walks in and asks Peter if he remembers anything from the night before, but Peter doesn't. MJ talks about how the suit is changing him, but Peter denies it, saying that the suit is the only reason he's still alive. Harry sarcastically says,
Yeah, it's pretty great, isn't it?
which makes Peter angrily call him out for being ungrateful of everything he's done to save his life. Peter then storms out, but overhears Norman screaming about his latest attempt at a cure for Harry. This leads to an emotional conversation where Norman thanks Peter for being Harry's friend, and tells him that he's proud of the man Peter has become. Harry overhears this, and since Peter just refused to give the suit back, Harry is rightfully pissed about this, and he yells at MJ to leave. After this, Peter finds out that Miles is missing, and we cut back to see what's going on with that. Miles is being held at a hunter base, but he breaks out and starts trying to find an exit. Eventually, he ends up in an area where he comes face to face with Martin Lee, and a battle ensues. Miles beats Lee and throws him out of the arena, telling him to go find Peter. He does so by going to Feast, which lures Peter there. He gives Peter the location, which leads to a fight between Craven and Peter, where Peter nearly kills Craven. Miles stops him from doing this, which leads to a fight between the two Spider-Men. Miles is barely able to snap Peter out of it, and Peter tears the suit off. He takes the symbiote back to Oscorp so that Connors can destroy it, but Harry lashes out when he finds out about this. He hits the tube containing it, which releases it, and Harry becomes Venom. You then get to play as him as he rampages through Oscorp and eventually breaks out to fight Kraven. This fight ends with Venom biting Kraven's head off, which is insane. I genuinely didn't expect the game to go that far. After that, we switch back to Peter and Miles as they try to find and stop Harry. He ends up turning a lot of citizens, and MJ, into symbiotes, so Peter has to fight her so she can free herself. They then find out that Harry is going after the meteorite that brought the symbiote to Earth. Before they can deal with that though, City Hall is infested with symbiotes, so Peter and Miles go there to help out. They're overrun by symbiotes, resulting in Peter getting knocked out and infected by another symbiote. But before Miles is infected too, Martin Lee returns and helps Miles. They both go into Peter's mind to break the deep-rooted bond between Peter and the symbiote, and in doing so, Lee ends up channeling all of his power into the heart of that connection. This results in him seemingly losing his powers, but Peter ends up with a new anti-venom suit. This suit comes with all the powers of the symbiote, but there's no negative effects, and it hurts the actual symbiotes due to Mr. Negative's energy. After this, Peter gets a call from Dr. Connors, warning him that Harry is going after the meteorite. When he gets to Oscorp, he's unable to stop Harry from getting the rock, which results in the symbiotes spreading throughout the city. Peter talks to Connors, who tells him that Harry is gone, and the only way to stop him is to kill the host body. But right after, Norman asks Peter to save Harry. Afterwards, Peter goes around town rescuing people from the symbiotes, and then he meets up with Miles, who shows up in this suit. He then goes on to take down a symbiote nest, and in the process, he gets a vision from the hive mind showing him the meteorite. He says it's under the Harlem subway tunnel, but he wants Peter to wait for him, as he also got a vision that Haley was in danger, so he wanted to go help her. Peter ignores his request and goes ahead, committed to saving Harry. In the end, he finds Harry and gets another vision of where the meteorite really is. Pete, Miles, and MJ all meet up at May's house and they make a master plan. Harry wants Peter to join him to heal the world with the symbiotes, so Peter will lure Harry away, while MJ and Miles steal the meteorite and bring it to the EMF center, where they'll use the particle accelerator to destroy it. This leads to the final battle, where Peter leads Harry back to Midtown High, fights him for a while, but then Harry grows wings, flies to EMF, and then fights Miles for a while. In the end, they manage to use the anti-venom to temporarily get Harry back, and he tells Peter to kill him. Miles supercharges the particle accelerator and destroys the rock right as Peter destroys the symbiote on Harry. The resulting explosion and/or Peter killing the symbiote ends up killing Harry as well, but as MJ and Peter are mourning, Miles uses his venom abilities to restart his heart, which brings Harry back. But he's in a coma. Norman blames the Spider-Man for this and goes to Otto Octavius for information on their identities. Meanwhile, Peter decides to take a break from being Spider-Man to focus on being Peter Parker. He tries to set up an EMF station in his garage and takes time to stabilize things with MJ and his job, while Miles protects New York. Okay, that was a pretty long summary. But now that it's all out of the way, let's talk about it. Before I really get into it, I do want to say that overall, I really enjoyed the game. I was consistently engaged to the point where I finished the main story in 2 days. The only reason this video came out so late is that it took me a lot longer to do the rest of the side missions and replay the main story, so despite all the things that I'm about to get into, I promise I genuinely did enjoy the story. The first thing that I want to talk about is predictability. I kind of was able to guess where the story was going to go, and that's because the story for all 3 games are very similar. Let me describe it to you. Spider-Man has to deal with someone close to him who has taken a dark path and threatens to do something that will hurt or kill a lot of innocent people. In the process, someone close to Spider-Man is gravely injured or dies. Which game am I describing? Well, you can apply this to all 3. Spider-Man 1. Spider-Man's mentor goes down a dark path, does something that impacts the whole city, and then someone close to Spider-Man dies. In Spider-Man Miles Morales, someone close to Spider-Man goes down a dark path, does something that will impact the whole city, and then dies. In Spider-Man 2, someone close to Spider-Man goes down a dark path, does something that impacts the whole city, and then gets put into a coma. I was talking to my friend before I got to the final battle, and I literally said it would be more surprising if Peter managed to save Harry instead of him dying. I was also able to entirely predict when Peter was going to get the symbiote because it locks you into the advanced suit during that mission. I also managed to entirely predict anti-venom. I was thinking about how Spider-Man 1 locks you into the anti-ox suit for the final battle, so I was thinking, what if they lock you into a suit for the final battle? It would be some sort of anti-venom suit? Wait. Then it hit me. Anti-venom is a thing in the comics, and it would be a perfect way to let Peter keep the symbiote abilities after the main story. So, just by thinking of the first game, I managed to predict that anti-venom was going to be a major plot point. Anyways, like the first game, I kinda split this one into 3 acts. The first game had 3 acts, and each of them started with some big event. Act 1 starts with the Fisk battle, and then it transitions to Act 2 when Martin Lee bombs City Hall, and then Act 3 starts when Otto breaks into the raft and frees everybody. Unfortunately, it isn't as easy to split each act into specific villains. Kraven and the symbiote are both present from the beginning of the game until the end, so you can't split the game into 3 acts by using Kraven or Venom as starting points. Since you can't do it like that, I've decided to split it into segments using Peter himself. The 3 acts I'm going with are pre-symbiote, symbiote, and post-symbiote. This would mean that Act 1 starts with a Sandman boss and ends when Peter is healed by the symbiote. Act 2 ends with Peter taking the symbiote off, and 3 begins with Harry putting it on. The reason I'm breaking it down like this is because the sequel lacks any big turning points to separate these acts. Like, in the first game, each act begins with a bang. The Fisk boss, the bombing at Jefferson's celebration, the raft blowing up, each act of this game has something big happen to start it off. But in Spider-Man 2, the transition between acts don't feel as grand. The game starts off with a big boss fight, but the transition to Act 2 is marked by a cutscene along with your first taste of the symbiote surge ability. Unfortunately, this only comes via stronger attacks against regular enemies, so it doesn't really feel like anything too big happened. Compare this to the City Hall bombing, where you are instantly taken from being a super powerful hero to being a regular human as Miles, whose world was just turned upside down. The only one that feels genuinely grand is Harry becoming Venom, but again, compared to the first game, it's basically nothing. In Spider-Man 1, the raft mission comes with fighting multiple normal enemies, but then you also have to chase Vulture, Electro, you have an encounter with Scorpion, and then, on top of all of that, Peter is beaten and blindsided by Otto's turn to villainy. In Spider-Man 2, Peter sees Harry become Venom, and then you get new enemies to deal with, but they work pretty much the same as every other enemy in the game. And then, you end up playing as Venom against these regular enemies. So, the point is, the game doesn't have many big things that mark turning points in the story. This is also somewhat a gameplay issue, but I feel like certain things lack weight in this game. In the first game, every time you performed a finisher, there was a certain weight to it, which kinda came from this sound effect that played on the last move. This sound effect is still present in the sequel, but for whatever reason, it happens rarely. I thought that this was so that they could add it to the symbiote finishers to make them feel more brutal, but I was just as surprised to realize that the same thing applied when Peter had the symbiote.
Like me now!
So the finishers didn't really feel like they had as much weight behind them. Another area that felt kind of weightless was when Peter removed the symbiote. I know that they had the entire boss fight between Peter and Miles, but when it came to actually removing the symbiote, you only had to do 2 things. Spam square and then move the joysticks to the left and right. I know that the third Spider-Man movie has its issues, especially with the Venom story, but one thing I really liked was how hard Peter had to work to get the suit off. Every time he ripped one part off, it tried to mend the holes, making it hard for Peter to remove it. In the game, Peter rips the mask off, and then the chest, and then it cuts to him having the entire thing off. I know that the game tried to focus more on the mental struggle, but I do feel like it was missing that physical weight of removing the symbiote, because that would have further reinforced how strong of a bond it had with Peter. Other than that, as I mentioned in the gameplay section, I feel like it was obvious that there was a lot more focus on Peter in this game. It really feels like Miles takes a back seat while Peter gets the majority of story missions. I did tally it out, and out of 32 main missions, Peter has 14, Miles has 5, MJ has 3, but they're all shared with Peter or Miles, Harry has 1, and then the other 10 have gameplay for both Peter and Miles. So, tallying up how many missions are given to Peter, along with the ones that he shares with others, Peter has 14 on his own, 2 shared with MJ, and 10 shared with Miles. If we give each shared mission a value of 0.5, Peter has 25 missions. That is 65% of the main story that's dedicated entirely to Peter. And if you want to argue that this game is Peter's game and Miles is supposed to be a side character, then I have 2 responses. 1. Miles is on the cover art, and 2. The creative director, Brian Intihar, said that this game is called Spider-Man 2 because there are 2 Spider-Men. Miles is definitely supposed to be a main character. I've also seen people complaining about the contents of the side missions between the two. Miles has side quests consisting of finding stolen instruments from the music exhibit in an arts museum, as well as helping the students at Brooklyn Visions. Meanwhile, Peter gets basically all the brain teasers, and he gets the side missions with the Cult and Wraith. All of this led me to really realize that Miles took a back seat in this game, despite the fact that it's supposed to be a Peter and Miles game. But just because Peter gets a lot of focus, it doesn't mean that his segments come without problems. In fact, the main plotlines for both Peter and Miles needed some more time in the oven. Miles' story kind of focuses on him trying to protect his family. He's struggling to write his college essay, and that struggle is really only made worse when Kraven takes Lee. Miles is somewhat blinded by rage because Lee killed his father, but he's also constantly stressed because he doesn't know where Lee is, and he's worried that something will happen to his family. Unfortunately, as the plot develops, it becomes painfully obvious that Miles has no reason to worry about Lee, because there's so much proof that Kraven literally kidnapped him, and likely has intentions to fight him. We find out early on in the story that Kraven killed Scorpion, and if you consider that he kidnapped Scorpion at the same time as Lee, then there's no reason to believe that he would kill Scorpion but then team up with Lee. Then, after that, Peter learns that Kraven has more targets, and Miles goes to warn Black Cat about it. Miles directly sees that the hunters are after Black Cat. So, yeah. Then, in another mission, you find out that Kraven killed Vulture, Electro, and Shocker off-screen. Altogether, there's undeniable proof that Kraven is targeting villains to fight them. But, throughout the whole story, Miles is constantly searching for Lee because he believes that Lee is going to do something to hurt his family. Lee is literally in more danger than Miles' family. While I can definitely understand why Miles would be worried when Lee is first taken, I don't think it was a good idea to base his entire plotline around that, because it's really hard to connect with him when he's worried about something that isn't going to happen. Also, during the third act, Miles shows up randomly with a new suit. I personally think this suit is ugly as fuck, but story-wise, it's even dumber. Miles shows up randomly in this new suit. There is no setup for him making the suit, it just comes into existence. In both of the other games, there are missions and cutscenes dedicated to showing when, why, and how each hero decides to make a new suit. In this game, Miles just does it randomly, off-screen, in between missions. He also does this in the middle of a symbiote invasion, which doesn't look good for him. Ah yes, the city is in chaos. Peter needs help dealing with his best friend who has been corrupted by an alien, and there are innocent people getting taken over in the same way. I'm gonna make a new suit. Miles also calls it a Miles Morales original. Dude, what was your other suit? I understand story-wise why they would try to include this suit. Miles just got past his problems with Lee, he's signifying this new chapter in his life, and these new powers he got. But this just wasn't the time to do it. Now, I don't think that his story is bad, but I do think that it needed more development, and it could have been used to tell a story about morals, which would have been better paralleled with Peter's story. Instead of spending the entire game stressed about Lee hurting his family, I think it would have been better if Miles initially was worried about Lee escaping, but when they realized that Kraven was hunting and killing these villains, I think a better struggle for Miles would have been, does Lee deserve what Kraven is trying to do? That way, Miles isn't unnecessarily worried about Lee, but rather, he spends the game evaluating his morals. Then, he gets taken by Kraven, and when faced with an actual opportunity to kill Lee, he realizes that it's not right and frees him to go find Peter. With this, it's much more impactful when Peter gets the symbiote and his morals start to slip as well. Miles can have his arc, and the conclusion would be him helping Peter to come to the realization that Spider-Man should never be about vengeance or power, giving him the push he needs to get rid of the symbiote. Also, when Peter gets rid of the symbiote, Miles randomly has this Oscorp tube to put it in. Miles was kidnapped. The Oscorp tube came from literally nowhere. Anyways, speaking of the symbiote, let's talk about Peter a little bit. I personally think that there is so much potential with this story, but it just isn't developed enough. Despite having the vast majority of the main story missions, Peter's motivations with the symbiote aren't explained thoroughly enough. Near the end of the game, we get that mission where Miles and Lee go into Peter's mind and free him from the symbiote's control. When you get to the root of the problem, you see that it's Peter's guilt about May's death, and not being able to save everyone. Now, this is a very good idea, and there are some really good hints towards this, but it's actually never fully explored. May's death is at the center of it all, but we only get small hints towards that. Peter can't sell her house despite the fact that he can't afford the mortgage. He can't donate her things. He thinks back to her lesson about balance, etc. But those are only things that are really shown at the very start of the story. There are other hints towards Peter's guilt for not saving everyone, like on the pier when Kraven attacks at the prison transfer. Peter struggles to save everyone and needs Miles to stop focusing on Lee to help him. And at Coney Island, Peter almost fails to save people trapped on a collapsing roller coaster, and even goes as far as to apologize because he thinks they're gonna die. This motivates his addiction to the symbiote. It makes him stronger, it makes him better, but literally everyone else says that it makes him worse. We aren't really shown why Peter thinks it makes him a better Spider-Man, outside of the obvious power boost. Literally after Peter gets the symbiote suit, he becomes hyper-focused on catching threats rather than the overall safety of civilians, as you can see when Peter has to choose between following the lizard or saving someone. He begrudgingly chooses to save them, but ends up just tossing them to the ground with almost no regard for them. I think that his motives could have been better set up, if he had more time to actually save people with the suit. Like, put him in another situation like Coney Island, where he needs to save people, but rather than being helpless, the suit has tendrils that can aid him. Finally, he has something that can give him the power boost he needs. He has something that can make him more efficient. This suit makes him better, except his desire to save everyone is amplified by the symbiote, so he loses focus just on saving people as he targets villains over civilian safety. And he gets angry when people accuse him of being a worse Spider-Man because how could he be? He has the suit. In the actual game, things move very quickly. Peter gets the suit, starts going after Kraven to get the lizard cure, makes the cure, goes to fight Lizard, finds out the symbiote is an alien, keeps the suit, refuses to give it back to Harry, finds out Miles has gone missing, goes to find him, fights Kraven, and then fights Miles to get the suit off. Throughout all of that, there is only a single mission where Peter has to save someone, and it's the first mission after you get the suit. The worst part is, it's a basic mission. You have to save one guy from hunters. This is something Peter would easily be able to do without the suit, so there isn't a good argument for this scene being Peter's justification. With all of that being said, the point is, Peter needed a lot more time to develop his insecurities about being Spider-Man. There was nowhere near enough time spent on that to justify his actions with the symbiote. Another thing about his behavior with the symbiote is, it develops too fast. After making the lizard cure, Peter goes from his normal quipping self,
I'm fresh out of honey,
to being a completely different person.
no wonder your family left you!
I was really looking forward to a slow burn where the aggressive tendencies of the symbiote started slipping out little by little, but they come out literally as soon as he gets it. Right after Pete gets the suit, symbiote surge activates on its own. Every time Peter is in surge mode, he acts a lot more aggressively than normal, meaning that the very first time you get to play as symbiote Peter, he's angry and aggressive. Also, the symbiote itself is a bit confusing. When we start the story, Harry has the symbiote. He has it for the entirety of Act 1, except there are literally no signs of it altering his personality. Peter and MJ both think he's acting normal, and if he were acting differently, seeing as they're his best friends, you'd think they would notice. But for the entire time he has it, it does absolutely nothing to him, other than make him healthy and give him the symbiote abilities. However, literally immediately after Peter gets it, the rage starts to come out. Now, you know what? They could be trying to say that Peter's emotions corrupted the symbiote. But if that's the story we're going with, I once again have to say that there needed to be more development for that. Now, let's move on to Act 3. I feel like Harry has some good setup for becoming Venom. He's mad that Peter refused to get the suit back, and when he finally takes it off, he wants to destroy it. Harry sees this as Peter not caring about his life and not wanting to save him. Coupled with the symbiote's corruption, Harry's rekindled relationship with it turns him into something far worse than Black Suit Spider-Man. He even had a really good moment where, after eating Kraven, he takes a step back and realizes that he just took someone's life. But then, after that, things get too rushed. Harry almost immediately goes from being remorseful to, I'm going to take over the world. He gains the ability to create symbiotes from thin air, but then needs the meteorite to do it? If he needs the rock, how did he do it initially? And then, after only 6 missions, Harry shuffles in between the Venom personality of, I'm gonna heal the world with symbiotes, and the Harry personality of, we need to destroy the symbiote before it kills more people. At least when Peter was struggling to break free from the symbiote's control, it was a struggle for him. You could hear it, especially during the boss fight with Miles.
You're better than this! I know, but... No.
With Harry, Peter uses anti-venom to open up the suit a little bit, and then Harry's personality completely shifts. When the suit is on, he's fully Venom, but when the mask opens, he's fully Harry, despite the rest of the symbiotes still being connected to him. Lastly, I want to talk about Miles' involvement in the final battle. In the entire game, all 32 missions, Miles and Harry have literally 2 interactions. They meet at Coney Island, and then have a phone call after EMF is destroyed. Those are the only 2 times that Miles interacts with arguably the main villain of the story. Now, if we want to get technical, I feel like Kraven is much more of a rival for Miles than Peter, and Harry is much more of a rival for Peter than Miles. But the problem lies with the fact that Miles doesn't have a fight with Kraven. Kraven puts Miles under mental anguish due to his constant worries about Lee. Kraven then kidnaps Miles, makes him fight Lee, and then does who knows what to Miles after Lee escapes. But in the end, Miles doesn't have a fight with Kraven. Peter does. So, in a game that's supposed to be about both Spider-Men, Miles needs to have stakes in the final battle. But that doesn't work when Harry and Miles have absolutely no connection. Now, this isn't to say that I don't like what they did between Kraven and Peter. I think that symbiote Peter's anger towards Kraven and the Hunters is done really well, and it's the best developed thing about Peter with the symbiote.
They destroyed the EMF! Destroyed my life! I'm going to lose May's house because of them and... Kraven!
I do, however, think that there is too much focus on Peter compared to Miles. Miles has way less boss fights than Peter does, considering that they share 2 of the boss fights. Also, having Kraven kill the vast majority of the Sinister Six off-screen was a choice. Now, that was a lot. I know it seems like I'm being really negative about this game, but I promise, I do love it. I don't think that the story does anything inherently wrong, I just think that it needed more time to flesh out its ideas, because there are so many good ideas here. And here's the main problem I think the game has: the length. Spider-Man 1 has 44 main missions, while Spider-Man 2 has 32. That's 12 less than the first game. There are also less side quests around the map. Now, in terms of variety, both games are similar. Spider-Man 1 has 16 different types of side quests, while the sequel has 15. However, Spider-Man 1 has much more frequent side quests. 55 backpacks to collect, 47 landmarks, etc. In Spider-Man 2, these things are much less frequent, meaning that you can complete them a whole lot faster. Like, without DLC, Spider-Man 1 has 51 trophies. Spider-Man 2 has 42, nearly 10 less. I think that this game is definitely shorter than the first one, and that is a detriment, as it really needed more time to fully develop its ideas. Now, that's not to say that I have problems with everything, because like I said, I don't think this game does anything bad. I think that the first act is nearly perfect. Hell, I'd even say that the first act is more engaging than the first game. If they managed to keep that momentum through the entire story, there would have been no contest. Act 1 has the vast majority of my favorite moments, including the
I think we should get him.
line, and the part where you help a dying Peter through the battlefield while Harry kicks Craven's ass. Speaking of, I think the relationship between Peter and Harry was great. I absolutely adore the scene where Peter decides to join EMF with Harry, and their excitement is just so adorable, I can't. They really managed to make me invested in their friendship, and when I realized that Peter getting the symbiote would result in Harry getting sick again, I was really dreading the mission where it happened. The acting in this game is phenomenal. Just like the first game, Yuri Lowenthal gives it his all, but also Najee Jeter as Miles, Graham Phillips as Harry, and Laura Bailey as MJ. Really, the entire cast is great. All of them really bring their A-game and give amazing performances. A fun fact I like to point out is that Graham Phillips played a young Ben 10 in the live-action Ben 10 movie, Race Against Time. Yuri Lowenthal also happened to voice the teenage version of Ben in the animated shows, so in this game, both Harry and Peter are voiced by Ben Tennyson. Anyways, like I said, the acting is great. Yuri Lowenthal is especially great with both normal and symbiote Peter. Look at this.
Where? Yes. There you are. Why are you doing this?
Look out!
Sorry, I was always so busy. Harry! Please!
I also really like the fight between Peter and Miles, not only from a gameplay standpoint, but from a story perspective. The way Peter justifies his use of the symbiote is honestly sad.
All I wanted was to save everyone! MJ! May! Now this city thinks that I'm the problem, but I'm not anymore!
I do genuinely think that this is great, I just wish it had more development. So yeah, with that, I'm out of things to talk about. Overall, I really do think that the game is an improvement over the first game, especially with the gameplay. I like the direction that they tried to go with these characters, but they really just needed more time to develop it all. Other than that though, I think that this is a definite improvement over the first game, and if there's another sequel, I hope they do make any changes they need. If the post-credits scene is teasing Cindy Moon as the next Spider-Person, they will need a much longer story to balance 3 Spider heroes. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to subscribe. I'm so close to 1,000 subs, and I'd be really happy if we could hit that milestone. Also, feel free to let me know what you thought of the game. With that being said, I will see you all next time. Goodbye!